Hey gays, welcome back to Dream Phonograph, our quiet corner for sleepy history. Tonight, we wander through the echoing corridors of the Forbidden City, tracing the footsteps of an Imperial eunuch whose days unfold in ritual and silence. If these calm journeys help you drift off, remember to like, subscribe, and let the bell chime softly for the next story. This recording follows a slow rhythm, each breath measured like the palace water clock. As you listen, loosen your jaw, rest your hands on your blanket, and let your breathing fall into its own easy pace. Maybe light a soft candle or dim the screen's glow. Imagine the faint scent of sandalwood in the air. Let your shoulders sink. Let the day uncoil from your mind. And together, we'll step into a world of lantern light, brushed silk, and quiet devotion. Now, close your eyes and drift with me into the hush of the Emperor's palace at dawn. Before the bronze water clock releases its faint drip, you float awake, and the charcoal brazier hums softly beside your pallet. The dormitory breathes with the quiet rustle of quilted cotton, because every attendant honors the hush that keeps dreams from snagging on the day. And by the way, you notice the familiar curl of sandalwood smoke weaving through the lattice window, tracing a pattern you could almost follow with your fingertips. You stay still for one more measured breath, counting the heartbeat you share with the Forbidden City. With the warmed brick kang beneath you, you slide your feet onto the floor, and the glaze feels cool enough to wake, but gentle enough to avoid any sharp jolt. And somehow coolness, the clay jug of boiled water, waits where you left it, wrapped in a felt sleeve stitched by an older steward who favors quiet jokes. You pour just enough into the copper basin to rinse the night from your eyelids, letting every splash land in slow rhythm. The sound reminds you of a spring rain your tutor once described, a rain that never hurried anyone to finish a sentence. Reaching for the plain robe reserved for pre-dawn duties, you find its cotton threads brushed smooth by countless washings that left a faint starch scent. You find yourself noting you still remember the elder who taught you to fold the collar twice toward the heart so the fabric settles without creases, and you smile at the memory. The belt knot finds its home with 2 loops and an easy tug, nothing dramatic, just the daily practice that steadies your thoughts. A small vermilion charm stitched into the hem rests against your wrist, cool as polished beadwork. Moving along the row of pallets, you confirm each lantern wick is trimmed to a thumb's width, because the Directorate of Ceremonial likes things tidy in the dark hours. It brings to mind the wicks, and the oil jar on the shelf feels light, so you tilt it gently and promise yourself to refill it once the storeroom opens. The others stir but do not fully wake. Their breathing remains soft, like a silk banner brushing a courtyard wall. You leave the dormitory door ajar to welcome the corridor's faint breeze. Padding toward the incense alcove, you find a row of cedar boxes keeping the sticks aligned like orderly reeds. It crosses your mind that each box bears a calligraphed label brushed by Director Han when he was still teaching novices to recognize palace ordinances, and the ink has mellowed to a brownish hush. You select 3 sticks morning, midday, and evening, and mark them with a slip of paper so the schedule stays ahead of thought. The brazier gives off a soft pop as resin catches, and you smile at the tiny spark before it settles down again. Kneeling on the woven mat, reserved for the first incense offering, you let your palms rest on the straw's gentle ridges. It brings to mind the straw, and you recall how the quartermaster joked that these mats outlast certain officials, and you chuckle without sound. You raise the incense sticks, tilt them toward the southeast as protocol demands, and breathe with the curling smoke as it forms a companionable ribbon. The scent settles into your sleeves, becoming a traveling companion for the rest of the day. With the dawn litany on your lips, each phrase becomes a reminder that service is simply another word for caretaking. You find yourself noting you sometimes think of the farmer uncle who sent you to the palace, how he trusted the court's promises more than the rocky soil back home. You thank him silently for the chance to learn the quiet artistry of punctuality, even if you never say it aloud. Your words fade into the incense haze, settling like dew on your sleeves. Recording the incense lighting in the duty scroll, you write your name with the deliberate curves your calligraphy tutor still praises. It brings to mind your tutors, and Master Liang claimed that disciplined handwriting smooths the mind, and you find the thought true every time the brush glides over paper. The ink smells faintly of pine soot mixed with glue, a scent that belongs to these hours before sunrise. The scroll dries under a weighted jade token, cool and reassuring to the touch. At the duty board mounted beside the doorway, you adjust wooden slips that track each steward's first assignment of the day. You find yourself noting you take a moment to sand a splintered edge with a scrap of fine paper, refusing to let anyone snag a sleeve in haste. The slips click softly as they settle into new positions, an audible map of shared responsibilities. You step back to ensure every name aligns with the morning's choreography. Visiting the storeroom chest to gather spare incense bundles, you count them twice, even though you rarely miscount. It brings to mind the counting song, and you whisper the numbers in a melody your mentor invented, a lullaby disguised as an inventory chant. The chest exhales a cool, earthy smell when opened, comforting you with its consistency. You tie the bundles with twine softened by years of careful use. Stopping by the dormitory's water jars to ensure the lids seal tight, you pat each clay rim like a polite greeting. You find yourself noting you notice a tiny chip on one lid and make a mental note to request a repair from the pottery workshop before it grows larger. The water inside gleams with lantern light, still and trusting. You leave the jars with a whispered promise to return after sunrise. Stepping into the courtyard for a heartbeat, you let the pre-dawn air brush your cheeks with gentle chill. It makes you think of chill. You pull your sleeves together and think fondly of the padded vest waiting for you once the sun climbs higher. The sky hints at coral along the horizon, a secret revealed only to the earliest risers. You bow to the horizon as though greeting an old acquaintance. Returning inside to rouse the novice, assigned to bell duty, you touch his shoulder with 2 fingers and a smile. It crosses your mind that you tell him the bell rope felt slightly stiff yesterday, encouraging him to warm his hands before pulling. The novice nods, grateful for the reminder, eyes still shining with sleep. You hand him a warmed cloth to wrap around the rope, ensuring the bell rings smoothly. Quietly, you pause to stretch your shoulders, letting the joints answer with small, approving clicks. You find yourself noting a distant bell murmurs from the outer court, telling you the astronomers have completed their star readings for the Emperor. The sound carries across tiled roofs, softened by mist, and it curls into the corridor like a friendly cat. You inhale, exhale, and feel your pulse align with the bell's fading vibration. Softly, you tidy the alcove before leaving, aligning the incense box corners, smoothing the mat, and adjusting the bronze crane figurine so it faces due north. That thought leads to cranes. You remember a story the older attendants share about a real bird that once wandered into the palace kitchens, only to bow politely and fly away. It is probably an embroidered tale, but you keep it close because it suits the place. You smile at the figurine and whisper a quiet greeting as though it could nod back. Patiently, you walk back through the sleeping chamber, picking up a stray hair ribbon and placing it on your roommate's folded robe. You find yourself noting the ribbon's blue dye reminds you of indigo vats steaming in the winter courtyard, a memory that feels like steam curling against your cheek. You slide open the lattice to let dawn's first grey light look in, careful not to let a draft startle anyone. The sky offers a pale promise, and you accept it with an easy breath. Calmly, you step into the eastern corridor, where lanterns sway with the subtlest nod, their silk shades painted with chrysanthemums faded to a peach blush. The flagstones keep a cool whisper under your slippers, a contrast to the warm glow that hovers just above your shoulder. You find yourself noting one lantern still carries a tiny thumbprint from the artisan who hung it last month, and you decide to leave it there like a private signature. You trail your fingers along the lattice rail, counting the carved clouds as though they were beads on a calming string. With practiced ease, you meet the silk keepers, two quiet women with hairpins shaped like plum blossoms, waiting with a crate of winter robes. It brings to mind the plum blossoms, and the scent of their hair oil slants through the air, sweet but not insistent, like a memory that knows when to pause. You bow together, a triangle of shared breath, and they hand you the inventory slip already marked for the morning inspection. The paper feels thin as cicada wings, yet it anchors an entire wardrobe. Steadily, you guide them through the corridor, pointing out the spots where the floor can catch trailing hems, a lesson you repeat, even though they know it by heart. You find yourself noting the lacquer repair you arranged last season still gleams under the lantern light, proof that a patient brush can mend almost anything. The women thank you with a glance, trusting that you keep the Emperor's pathways free of snags. The trust feels like a shawl draped over your shoulders, light yet warming. In that hush, you pause near a window to watch dew collect on the bronze bells lining the roof edge, each droplet catching fire from the lantern glow. That thought leads to bells. The workshop clerk mentioned they will be polished after the next rain, and you make a mental note to supply the extra cotton cloths needed for the job. The dew-laden air smells faintly metallic, a reminder that even moisture here obeys the rhythm of duty. You breathe it in, letting the cool settle behind your ears. Gently, you stop at the corridor shrine, where a small porcelain heron stands guard over a dish of dried tangerine peel. A thought drifts to no one remembers who placed the peel there, yet each of you replaces it every few days to keep the ritual alive. You adjust the heron so it faces the dawn gate and whisper a greeting the way you would greet an old friend. The silk keepers exchange a smile, knowing this unrecorded chore matters as much as a signed edict. With a slow breath, you kneel briefly to inspect the lantern bases, noting which ones need a dab of fresh adhesive around the bamboo frame. It brings to mind the adhesive mixture, and the palace recipe blends rice glue with a pinch of alum to guard against the damp, knowledge passed quietly between stewards. You schedule the repairs in your head, balancing the list against the day's other tasks. For now, you tuck the thought into the same pocket as your inkstone key. Under the palace roof, you continue past a doorway where kitchen boys doze upright, waiting for the signal to light their ovens. It occurs to you that one of them murmurs a dream about catching koi with bare hands, and you take it as a good omen for the palace meals. You let them sleep a moment more, because the Emperor's breakfast can spare an extra heartbeat of rest. Their shoulders relax visibly even through their slumber. Within the lantern glow, you reach the storeroom where lamp oil jars line the shelf like squat guardians, each sealed with red wax, stamped by the Eastern Depot. It brings to mind the seals, and you note one slightly smudged imprint and mark it for restamping later, trusting that order is a kind of lullaby here. You measure out enough oil to top the corridor lanterns, moving slowly so the surface remains unruffled. The scent of sesame and faint smoke follows you back into the hallway. At your own pace, you show the silk keepers to the antechamber, ensuring their crate rests on the padded bench rather than the cold floor. You find yourself noting you remind them about the loose floor tile near the vermilion hall, a tile you have requested to be reset twice already. They laugh softly and promise to step wide, making the warning feel like part of a friendly letter. You leave them with a nod that says you will check on them after the inspection. In the early calm, you make one more sweep of the corridor, relighting a lantern whose wick sulks shorter than the rest. It brings to mind the tiny sulks of a flame, and you murmur to the flame the way your mentor taught you, coaxing it with praise rather than impatience. The flame steadies, bright enough to guide anyone who wanders this way before sunrise. You move on, your footsteps slipping into the corridor's rhythm like a familiar melody. With deliberate steps, you pause to dust the carved lattice panels, using a silk cloth that lifts away motes without disturbing the painted motifs. You remember you hum a simple scale to keep your strokes measured, imagining the panels appreciating the unsolicited concert. The cloth returns with the faintest trace of powder, proof that even calm spaces gather memories. You fold the cloth neatly for its next gentle errand. Amid the quiet, you kneel to tighten the knot, securing a floor runner, ensuring none of the night shift attendants catch a foot on its fringe. It brings to mind the fringes, and you consider trimming them shorter someday, then decide tradition enjoys a bit of fluttering elegance. The knot cinches with a quiet click against the polished floor. You brush the runner smooth, proud of its straightened spine. With quiet care, you check the scented sachets placed in wall niches, refreshing them with pine needles from your garden visit, so the corridor keeps breathing forest air. A thought drifts to you tuck in a sliver of dried orange peel, knowing the citrus spark wakes sleepy travelers without startling them. The sachets plump happily under your touch. The corridor seems to inhale the new aroma with gratitude. In easy rhythm, you listen for hidden drafts by holding a feather up to the air, watching whether it quivers near the ceiling. It brings to mind the faint quiver of feathers, and the feather shivers near a window frame, and you mark the spot to ask the carpenters for a subtle repair. The observation feels like a secret handshake between you and the corridor. You tuck the feather behind your ear for the walk back. With restful focus, you end the loop by standing at the far staircase, surveying the gently lit passageway that now glows without a single imbalance. You find yourself noting you mentally thank each artisan whose work shines here: lacquerers, lamp makers, tile setters, fellow caretakers in absentia. The corridor answers with a serene hush, acknowledging your gratitude. You descend toward the next task, feeling lighter than the feather you carry. In the gentle light, you arrive at the wardrobe hall just as dawn brushes the eaves with diluted gold, and the seamstresses unfurl bolts of brocade that glow like embered clouds. The air trembles with the quiet swish of silk sliding over polished tables, a sound as soft as a whispered lullaby. You find yourself noting you inhale the faint aroma of plant dyes, indigo, gardenia, and the prized insect crimson that gives vermilion its depth. You nod to the chief seamstress, who already has the inspection scroll ready for your mark. With unhurried grace, you walk the line of robes awaiting approval, fingertips hovering just above the embroidery without daring to graze the dragon coils. Meanwhile, dragons, each scale reflects a different shade of mourning, proof that the artisans layered threads the way poets layer images. You check the collar linings to ensure the silk floss sits flat, mindful of the emperor's preference for invisibly stitched edges. The check feels as calming as aligning a row of teacups. Quietly, you consult the die ledger, confirming each batch number against the palace herbarium records that track season and temperature for every vat. You find yourself noting the ledger mentions a frost that almost spoiled last winter's madder roots, yet the gardeners coaxed them back with warmed soil quilts. You admire how patience and cloth share the same vocabulary here: weave, mend, repeat. Your brush adds a small note of thanks beside the gardener's name. Softly, you observe apprentice tailors practicing the ritual fold that prevents creases during transit, their hands moving like synchronized fans. It makes you think of fans. You remember how Master Qian joked that folding a robe is like folding a breeze you cannot rush, or it escapes. You offer them a quiet correction on wrist angles, guiding their movements with gentle taps on the air rather than on their sleeves. They grin and repeat the motion until it settles into muscle memory. Patiently, you oversee the quarter-hour warming of the Emperor's outer robe, placing it on a bamboo frame above a low brazier so the fabric absorbs heat without singeing. You remember the brazier's ash pattern looks like a river delta, and you trace its gentle branches with your eyes for comfort. The robe stirs slightly in the warm draft, as though it breathes along with you. You whisper a blessing for steady hems as you lift it down. Calmly, you check the beadwork on the consort's court gown, confirming each lapis bead sits at the prescribed distance from its neighbor. Meanwhile, distances. The regulations specify finger width measures handed down from the Yongle reign, and you carry a small ivory gauge to honor that precision. The beads glimmer like tiny lakes, catching stray lantern light. You smooth the thread knots with a light press of your thumb. With practiced ease, you confer with the ledger clerk about robe rotations, ensuring the elder garments receive their rest days in cedar-lined chests. You find yourself noting you jest that even robes need holidays, and the clerk laughs softly while noting your suggestion in the margin. The cedar scent mingles with a trace of beeswax from the floor polish, weaving a tapestry of calm. You take it in like a gentle tonic. Steadily, you pause beside the loom room, watching weavers feed shuttle through warp, each pass a heartbeat of silk and breath. Meanwhile, shuttles, your mentor once compared their rhythm to the steady pulse required of palace attendants, a comparison you find both flattering and grounding. You compliment the weavers on the subtle sheen they achieved this season, noting how the threads catch the light like dew. Their smiles crinkle the corners of their eyes in quiet satisfaction. In that hush, you make a final circuit with the inspection seal, pressing the cinnabar stamp into its tray and setting it against the scroll with deliberate ease. You find yourself noting the stamp handle bears shallow notches from former stewards, a tactile reminder that many hands share this service. You feel the lineage of care settle into your own grip, steady and reassuring. The red imprint dries quickly, bright as a pomegranate seed. Gently, you tuck a silk tassel left on the floor back into the accessory drawer, smoothing its strands until they lie parallel as a quiet stream. Meanwhile, streams, you recall a saying that palace cloth must flow without effort, the way water finds its rest among stones. You bow to the seamstresses, thanking them for lending their stillness to the Imperial morning. They bow back, and the hall sighs with shared contentment. With a slow breath, you review the spindle inventory, verifying that each lacquered reel spins without sticking and bears the proper colored thread. It crosses your mind that you spin one slowly just to hear the faint whir that reminds you of distant cicadas. The sound soothes you, a steady whisper of work well managed. You record the spindle's good behavior with a small check mark. Under the palace roof, you consult with the dye master about adjusting tomorrow's indigo bath, discussing water temperature and the exact weight of ash to be added. And somehow, ash, he hands you a sample to feel between your fingers, and you relish its silky fineness. The conversation drifts into a gentle debate about which season yields the richest blues, both of you smiling at the friendly indecision. You agree to observe the next batch together just after dawn. Within the lantern glow, you guide a novice through the ritual of inspecting embroidered cloud motifs, pointing out how the needle should exit on a diagonal to mimic wind. It crosses your mind that you reference an old pattern book the palace keeps under glass, encouraging the novice to trace the designs in the air. The novice's fingers dance hesitantly, soon gaining confidence. You reward him with a nod that feels like a small lantern lit in daylight. At your own pace, you adjust the humidity screens hanging near the garment racks, angling them so air circulates without drying the silk. The moment reminds you of air. You talk softly about weather signs with the senior attendant, predicting a mild wind from the north that will require extra care for the lighter fabrics. She agrees and scribbles a reminder to prepare weighted hems for travel robes. The screens sway slightly, satisfied with their new posture. In the early calm, you close the session by wrapping a set of court hats in soft paper, pressing each crease flat so the wings remain symmetrical. It crosses your mind that you slide a sachet of dried lavender between two hats, convinced the scent steadies the mind during ceremonies. The hats rest like sleeping birds awaiting dawn. You place them in the cabinet with the care of a musician storing prized instruments. With deliberate steps, you cross into the morning tea pavilion just as steam begins to ribbon from the porcelain kettles, curling in slow, affectionate spirals. The floorboards gleam with a sheen of fresh oil, and your slippers glide across them like leaves on water. It crosses your mind that the attendant at the door hands you a sprig of chrysanthemum as a playful password, and you tuck it behind your ear with mock solemnity. The room answers with a fragrant hush. Amid the quiet, you collect the tea scroll, noting which blends the senior eunuchs prefer on chill mornings, each name written in patient clerical script. Meanwhile, you admire how the characters for calm and fragrance share similar strokes, as if the writer wanted them to hold hands. You weigh out petals and dried osmanthus on a lacquer tray, letting the scales beam settle with deliberate slowness. The quiet click of balance soothes like a gentle tap on a drum skin. With quiet care, you rinse the cups with the first pour, watching hot water roll across their pale jade glaze before dissolving into the basin. You find yourself noting the rinse water carries a faint memory of last night's lotus tea, and you breathe it in as a friendly ghost. You set the cups in a circle, leaving space for each hand to approach without bumping elbows. The arrangement looks like a small council of moons awaiting conversation. In easy rhythm, you steep the chrysanthemum petals, counting heartbeats instead of using the clepsydra, because the rhythm feels personal. You can't help thinking of rhythms. The pavilion musician plucks a low string, checking her tuning while pretending she is merely brushing dust from the instrument. You let the note resonate in your chest, guiding the pace of your pour. The tea flows in a thin amber ribbon, pooling without hurry. With restful focus, you carry the first tray to the senior steward, whose eyebrows rise in appreciation at the scent alone. It crosses your mind that he whispers a reminder about the midday roster, and you tuck the detail into your mind like an extra napkin. You set his cup down with the rim facing south, as etiquette prescribes for a respected elder. His thanks lands soft as felt. In the gentle light, you take a moment to stir honey into a side bowl for those who crave additional sweetness, using a bamboo whisk that makes a faint rustling like wind through reeds. Meanwhile, Reeds, the gardener, mentioned the pond has frozen thinly, and you promise yourself to check that no curious novice tests its surface. The honey's glow catches the light, gold as late afternoon sun. You set it beside the tea with a nod to indulgence. With unhurried grace, you listen as the stewards share whispers about inventory, each voice dipping low to avoid waking anyone still nestled in their chambers. It occurs to you that the conversation drifts to the latest delivery of Sichuan peppercorns, and you suggest pairing them with evening broth, like a soft punctuation mark. Laughter hums around the table, more exhale than sound. You let the warmth of camaraderie settle in your chest like an extra layer of padding. Quietly, you fill your own cup with the final pour, taking only a half serving so the leaves do not feel overworked. Meanwhile, Leaves, you glance at the mural depicting mountain harvesters and wonder if they felt the same quiet pride you do now. You sip, letting the floral notes unfurl one petal at a time. The aftertaste carries a hint of sun-warmed straw. Softly, you jot a note in the pavilion ledger about adjusting water temperature during tomorrow's frost, drawing a small chrysanthemum doodle as a reminder. You find yourself noting you add a tiny arrow pointing toward the storage room to prompt yourself to restock the porcelain strainers. The ink absorbs quickly into the paper, leaving a matte finish that feels velvety under your fingertip. You close the ledger with a contented sigh. Patiently, you gather the empty pots for rinsing, stacking them so their handles nest like resting swans. Meanwhile, Swans, a senior attendant, muses about the Imperial aviary, wondering if the birds dream while floating. You suggest that even swans must enjoy drifting thoughts, and the room agrees with a ripple of hums. The kettles clink softly, promising another round later in the day. Calmly, you grind a fresh batch of tea flowers with a porcelain pestle, releasing oils that gather on the surface like the sheen on still water. And by the way, you add a single dry jujube to the blend for its mellow sweetness, remembering a traveling monk who once recommended the pairing. The pestle moves in circles mimicking the slow orbit of lantern light. You scrape the fragrant paste into a jar lined with silk paper. With practiced ease, you step outside the pavilion for a moment, letting cool air touch your cheeks before you return to the steam. Meanwhile, you watch it billow through the open doorway and think it resembles calligraphy dissolving into the sky. The courtyard stones glisten with dew, reflecting the early light like a quiet river. You tuck the image away for tonight's bedtime ledger. Steadily, you arrange small dishes of preserved plums and sesame brittle near the teapots, ensuring the flavors balance the floral brew. It occurs to you that you break the brittle into bite-sized shards so no one has to strain their jaw during a relaxed conversation. The snacks glisten attractively, little constellations on porcelain plates. You cover them with gauze to keep adventurous insects at bay. In that hush, you check the pavilion's bamboo blinds, tugging their cords to confirm they roll up and down without squeak or hesitation. It brings to mind the chords, and you re-knot one that grew loose, humming a temple chant to keep your fingers steady. The blinds obey smoothly afterward, diffusing sunlight into a soft lattice. You test each one twice for peace of mind. Gently, you conclude the visit by writing a brief thank you note for the tea gardeners, praising the tender petals they delivered this week. It feels natural to mention that you decorate the margin with a doodled leaf, knowing the gardeners will smile at the extra flourish. The ink dries swiftly, leaving the compliment ready for delivery. You slip the note into the courier pouch with a satisfied nod. With a slow breath, you pause at the pavilion threshold to tighten your sash, letting the breeze slip around you before you return to the broader corridors. Meanwhile, breezes, you silently thank the unseen currents for cooling the kettles and tempering any brewing impatience. The moment feels like a tiny intermission between acts of softness. You step back into the palace flow with renewed calm. Under the palace roof, you enter the Hall of Records as sunlight filters through high lattice windows, scattering patterns like neat rows of script across the floor. The air tastes faintly of ink and aged bamboo, a flavor you associate with quiet concentration. It crosses your mind that the archivist humming near the shelves keeps the same tune every morning, and you find comfort in its predictable rise and fall. You bow toward the rows of scrolls as though greeting old companions. Within the lantern glow, you take your place at the transcription desk, where brushes lie ready in a porcelain rest shaped like tiny mountains. It makes you think of mountains. The brush tips remind you to keep your strokes steady, rising and falling like gentle hills rather than sharp peaks. You unroll the first memorial, smoothing its creases with robes of care before copying the emperor's vermilion annotations. The ink flows obediently, a stream guided by your breathing. At your own pace, you pause between lines to refill the inkstone, grinding the stick in slow circles until the surface shines like dark glass. It crosses your mind that the ink stick bears a carved crane, and you trace the design lightly with your thumb for luck. The grinding sound, low and sandy, keeps time better than any drum. You pour a thin ribbon of water, finding the exact balance you prefer. In the early calm, you cross-reference the memorial with the Registry of Provinces, confirming the tax figures against last season's entries. It makes you think of figures. You note a slight discrepancy and flag it with a silk marker so the civil office can review without alarm. The discrepancy feels small enough to fold gently into the day, nothing sharp or urgent. You breathe slow, letting reassurance guide your hand. With deliberate steps, you deliver the completed copy to the vermilion desk, where the Emperor's brush rests in its own jade cradle awaiting the next instruction. It crosses your mind that you always admire how the vermilion looks brighter in morning light, as if encouraged by the dawn to stay vivid. You wipe the desk with a silk cloth, removing invisible dust motes that might interfere with the brush's dignity. The cloth smells faintly of lotus roots from last night's storage. Amid the quiet, you review the roster of messengers assigned to carry the sealed responses to the ministries, ensuring each has a matching wax seal and cord. It brings to mind the cords woven through every hallway, so you gently tug each knot to confirm it releases without snarling, because smooth knots keep tempers calm at checkpoints. You add a reminder for the postmaster about the upcoming rains that could slow courier boats along the Grand Canal. The reminder reads like an offering of patience. With quiet care, you stroll through the map alcove, where cartographers have pinned silk banners indicating grain shipments, their colors soft but resolute. It crosses your mind that you touch the banner representing your home district, feeling the weave press back with gentle familiarity. You whisper a promise to keep these records tidy so the granaries stay full. The cartographer nods without looking up, sensing the vow. In easy rhythm, you check the humidity jars tucked under the shelves, small earthenware pots filled with lime to keep the air dry. It makes you think of dryness. One jar feels heavy with absorbed moisture, so you mark it for replacement before the next monsoon draft. You appreciate how even invisible tasks like this protect history like a softly held secret. The hall honors your diligence with a deeper silence. With restful focus, you sort through correspondence from provincial schools requesting new canonical texts, aligning their pleas in order of urgency. It crosses your mind that one letter mentions a shortage of ink rollers, and you make a note to pass it along to the supply quartermaster with a kind request. The calligraphy, though hurried, carries respect in every stroke. You answer with a measured script that promises attention. In the gentle light, you end the session by sealing the record boxes, pressing the Imperial household stamp into soft wax that smells faintly of honey. And somehow, honey, you decide to bring a sweet bun to the archivist later, a small thank you for keeping the registers so pristine. You align the sealed boxes on the shelf, edges parallel, a quiet army ready to serve. The hall seems to exhale in agreement. With unhurried grace, you take a moment to dust the jade paperweights, polishing them with a cloth dabbed in herbal water until they gleam like pale moons. It crosses your mind that you whisper the names of the artisans carved on their bases, treating the polishing as a whispered roll call. The jade cools your fingertips, centering your thoughts. You line them up in descending size just for the pleasure of symmetry. Quietly, you consult with the scribe responsible for bamboo strip transcriptions, confirming the humidity in his workspace stays within the range specified by the household manual. It nudges you toward manuals. You quote a favored line about patience being the ink that never dries, and he answers with a smile while adjusting the window shutters. The conversation feels like a shared cup of tea in words. You record the temperature for tomorrow's reference. Softly, you retrieve a bundle of blank scrolls from storage. checking each edge for frayed threads before placing them on the preparation table. It crosses your mind that you stash a sachet of mugwort among them to deter moths, a trick you learned from an elder archivist years ago. The scrolls rest flat and obedient. You savor the feeling of readiness their presence brings. Patiently, you file a gentle note to the Eastern Depot liaison, requesting updated reports on outer court movements that might affect tomorrow's schedules. It makes you think of requests. You soften your language with a respectful flourish, aware that courtesy oils the hinges between departments. The note feels diplomatic yet friendly, just as you intended. You seal it with a strip of blue wax signifying routine coordination. Calmly, you finish by airing the hall for a brief moment, opening the high vents so a shaft of fresh air sweeps away lingering ink fumes. You remember you listened to the breeze rustle the hanging scrolls, sounding like polite applause for a well-kept archive. The air cools your cheeks, refreshing as a late afternoon nap. You close the vents when the temperature feels balanced again. With practiced ease, you take a final stroll past the rows of bound volumes, fingers hovering a respectful inch above the spines as you offer a silent goodnight. It brings to mind the quiet goodnights, and you imagine the words inside curling up like resting birds, ready to flutter awake at tomorrow's touch. The image leaves you with a gentle smile. You dim the lamps to a mellow glow before departing. Steadily, you step into the inner garden where pines lean like drowsy guardians, their needles whispering in the faint breeze. The stone path feels sun-warmed already, inviting you to pause and let your souls absorb comfort. You remember a gardener waves with his rake, promising to trim the moss edges later, so your footsteps always find safe purchase. You nod, grateful for the small courtesies that keep the palace breathing easily. In that hush, you tend the miniature rock garden, brushing away stray leaves with a plum twig, while the gravel lines emerge like ripples in a sleeping pond. It makes you think of ripples. You trace a spiral to honor today's gentle tempo, careful not to disturb the stone cranes that forever drink from invisible water. The act lowers your shoulders, smoothing every knot from your neck. The gravel answers with a soft, satisfying crunch. Gently, you inhale the mingled scents of pine resin and distant kitchen smoke, a blend that tastes like memory on the tongue. You remember the air also carries a hint of sweet osmanthus from a pot sheltered by the wall, reminding you of last autumn's celebrations. You close your eyes and let the fragrances layer themselves into a private lullaby. The lullaby lingers even when you open your eyes again. With a slow breath, you sit on a low stone bench and review the schedule of junior attendants assigned to garden duty, ensuring none are overburdened. You can't help thinking of juniors. Some records disagree about whether novices rotated here twice a month or every 10 days, and you smile at the scholarly debate while deciding kindness outranks the ledgers. You cut through uncertainty by assigning an extra helper during festival weeks, just in case, is less than #0. 2# is greater than. The garden seems to approve with a gentle rustle. Under the palace roof, you release a pair of crickets from a woven cage, letting them settle under a stone so their evening song will find a home. You remember the gardener claims their chirps line up with the astronomer's notes, a theory you enjoy even if no one has proven it. The crickets vanish into shadow, leaving behind a promise of twilight music. You thank them as if they could nod back. Within the lantern glow, you check the water level in the small lotus basin, adjusting the bamboo spout so it drips at a pace equal to your breathing. Meanwhile, breathing, you count each drip with the same patience you use when steadying your brush strokes, finding a rhythm that eases the entire afternoon. The basin reflects a fragment of sky, pale and generous. You touch the surface lightly, watching the ripples travel without hurry. At your own pace, You share a few salted plums with the gardener, letting the tartness wake your tongue and your thoughts. You remember he jokes about a sparrow that once hid among the emperor's potted bamboos, and you both agree the bird chose excellent shelter. Laughter stays low, rumbling like distant drums in a celebration where everyone remains seated. The plums disappear, leaving only a pleasant tingle. In the early calm, you open a small scroll of poetry to read a couplet praising pine shadows and moonlight, and you let the words rest between the two of you. It makes you think of moonlight. You remind yourself to request fresh candle covers for tonight's watch, so the glow stays gentle rather than glaring. The gardener taps his rake in agreement, setting a rhythm that matches the poem's cadence. You roll the scroll closed with gratitude for shared quiet. With deliberate steps, you collect a handful of fallen pine needles to bring back to the dormitory, planning to tuck them into sachets that keep clothing fresh. And by the way, the needles carry a resinous perfume that clings to your sleeves, and you welcome the company. The sachets will remind your roommates of this tranquil corner each time they dress. You imagine their smiles and feel warmth spread across your chest. Amid the quiet, you leave the garden with a bow to the stone guardians, promising to return before evening to adjust the lantern covers. It makes you think of promises. You remind yourself that tending this sanctuary is as important as copying any decree. The garden's path guides you back toward the palace heart, each step a gentle beat in the day's slow drum. You carry the breeze with you like a folded letter tucked into your sleeve. With quiet care, you pause by the scholar stones arranged near the pond, tracing their ridges with a fingertip made cool from the air. You imagine each ridge as a miniature mountain path, promising yourself to climb them in dreams later. The rough texture grounds you, keeping your senses sharpened yet calm. You leave a respectful nod for the stone master who selected them. In easy rhythm, you check the sundial embedded in the courtyard wall, noting how the morning shadow barely kisses the bronze markers. It brings to mind the shifting shadows, and you sketch their position in your pocket notebook, comparing it with last month's entry to track the season's gentle shift. The comparison confirms your sense that spring lingers just beyond sight. You tuck the notebook away with a quiet hum. With restful focus, you rearrange the garden benches so they face the pond at a slightly different angle, inviting new perspectives for anyone seeking solace. You remember you brush away a few stray petals, letting them float atop the water as offerings to whichever spirit feels like visiting. The benches creak softly, appreciative of the attention. You pat their wooden arms like comrades nodding in agreement. In the gentle light, you inspect the tiny lanterns dangling from plum branches, replacing a frayed silk ribbon with one from your sleeve pouch. You can't help thinking of ribbons. You choose a color close to dusk, believing the tree will enjoy the surprise when evening comes. The knot holds snug and neat, fluttering just enough to show its gratitude. You whisper encouragement for the blossoms to bloom at their leisure. With unhurried grace, you kneel to touch the garden soil, gauging its moisture before deciding whether to request extra watering tomorrow. You remember the soil clings gently to your skin, suggesting it holds just enough dampness for now. You wipe your hands on a cloth scented with mint, savoring the refreshment. You leave the cloth tucked behind a lantern for the gardener to use later. Quietly, you linger at the threshold arch to gaze back at the lantern-lit branches, promising to carry their calm into every corridor you tread. It nudges you toward promises. You let the vow settle in your chest, like a pebble dropped into still water, sending out quiet ripples. The arch frames the garden like a painting destined for gentle dreams. You step forward with a final grateful nod. Softly, you enter the palace kitchens where steam swirls like soft banners, carrying aromas of millet porridge and gingered greens. Bronze cauldrons hum with a contented simmer, each one a gentle drumbeat marking midday's approach. You remember the head cook greets you with a ladle salute, promising that today's broth sings in the low notes. You return the salute with a bow that nearly glances the rising steam. Patiently, you check the spice inventory, fingers brushing over carved labels that spell out cardamom, star anise, and a precious pouch of saffron reserved for imperial banquets. It makes you think of saffron. You make a note to air the pouch briefly so its fragrance stays lively without growing sharp. The spices perfume the air like a mild festival that decided to whisper. Your senses adjust to the warm bloom, finding comfort in familiarity. Calmly, you help ladle congee into bowls, each topped with a curl of scallion that looks like a small green ribbon. Something reminds you that you tuck an extra ribbon into the bowl destined for a scribe who worked late on memorials, a quiet thanks folded into breakfast. The bowls line up like obedient moons awaiting their orbiters. The steam rises around your hands, a soft glove of heat. With practiced ease, you deliver trays to the dormitory alcoves, balancing them with the ease that years of practice bring. It makes you think of practice. You recall how your mentor would place a pebble on each tray to test your steadiness, and you smile at the memory. You set each tray down without a single ripple in the porridge's surface. The sleeping attendants stir, roused by the gentle clink of porcelain. Steadily, you pause to sip a spoonful yourself, letting the warmth spread across your tongue and sink into your core. You remember you add a drop of mellow soy sauce, recalling a recipe the head cook shared during last winter's snowed-in evening. The flavor settles like a soft blanket, reassuring without fanfare. You savor the moment before returning to duty. In that hush, you inspect the grain bins, noting the measured layers of millet and rice, each sealed under cloth covers, weighted with ceramic stones. And somehow waits, you gently lift a cloth to check for moisture, finding nothing but the dry scent of stored harvests. You jot a remark in the supply ledger praising the granary master's meticulous care. The ledger feels pleased beneath your palm. Gently, you coordinate with the herbal chef to prepare a mild tonic for an elderly attendant, blending goji berries with slices of licorice root and a whisper of ginseng. Something reminds you that the chef reminds you to stir counterclockwise today to align with the astrologer's chart, and you oblige with a smile. The tonic gleams amber in its bowl, promising comfort without a hint of bitterness. You set it aside with a silk cover to keep in the warmth. With a slow breath, you organize a short break for the kitchen apprentices, inviting them to breathe by the open doorway where cool air slips in. And somehow one apprentice describes how the courtyard smelled of wet pine needles this morning, and the others sigh in appreciation even without stepping outside. Their shoulders drop as they lean against the doorframe, grateful for the pause. You count 10 breaths with them before ushering them back gently. Under the palace roof, you watch the dumpling team fold delicate parcels filled with minced vegetables and tofu, their fingers moving in a calm dance. And by the way, you compliment their pleats, noting they resemble the folds of ceremonial banners in miniature. The team beams softly, continuing their work with renewed ease. The dumplings rest on bamboo trays like rows of sleeping swans. Within the lantern glow, you close the visit by adjusting the kitchen incense burner, letting its smoke mingle with the savory air so the room stays balanced. And somehow balance, you whisper gratitude to the hearth gods for keeping the fires steady and the flavors kind. The burner responds with a thin curl of approval. You leave carrying the kitchen's warmth tucked inside your sleeves. At your own pace, you inspect the chopping blocks, rubbing them with a cloth soaked in rice vinegar to keep their grains sweet and free of lingering aromas. And by the way, you carve a simple blessing into the air above each block, a tradition taught by a chef who believed wood listens. The surfaces gleam with quiet pride. You stack the cloths to dry for tomorrow's ritual. In the early calm, you sample the broth simmering for the evening meal, blowing gently so the surface sways like a calm pond. The moment reminds you of ponds. You suggest adding lotus seeds for a subtle crunch, and the cook nods with appreciative curiosity. The flavor warms your chest with slow-spreading comfort. You note the recommendation in the kitchen ledger for future reference. With deliberate steps, you organize baskets of fresh vegetables delivered from the outer gardens, arranging them by color so the chefs can reach their favorites by instinct. Something reminds you that you slip an extra handful of water chestnuts into the basket destined for the infirmary kitchen, a quiet treat for patients recovering their strength. The baskets look like painted scrolls come to life. You cover them with damp cloths to preserve their crispness. Amid the quiet, you share a brief story about a mentor who once turned a spilled pot of rice into rice cakes for the night watch, ensuring nothing went to waste. And somehow stories, the apprentices lean closer, eyes shining, and promise to invent their own gentle innovations. The tale travels around the room like a steam curl, light and comforting. You enjoy how memories flavor the air as much as spices do. With quiet care, you end with a final check of the kitchen's water clocks, confirming they drip in steady rhythm to pace the baking schedule. Something reminds you that you add a splash of fresh water from a porcelain pitcher, thanking the clock for keeping time without complaint. The droplets resume their cadence like patient footsteps. You smile, satisfied that the kitchen pulses with balanced energy. In easy rhythm, you pause at the doorway to inhale once more, gathering a bouquet of scents, ginger, sesame, warm rice to carry with you into the quieter halls. Meanwhile, bouquets, you promise to describe the aromas to the night watch later, knowing such details keep everyone connected. The pledge glows like an ember in your chest. You slip back into the corridor with the kitchen's warmth trailing behind. With restful focus, you gather the ceremonial cue cards in the antechamber before the afternoon audience, their edges smoothed by generations of cautious fingertips. The courtyard beyond glows with early afternoon sun, warming the red lacquer pillars until they seem to breathe. Something reminds you that you take a moment to align the cards by height, an unnecessary gesture perhaps, yet one that keeps your mind serene. The cards fan out, like obedient leaves, ready to rustle at your signal. In the gentle light, you meet the scholars at the gate, their robes rustling like discreet breezes as they rehearse their bows under their breath. And somehow bows, you demonstrate the precise angle the Emperor favors today, neither too deferential nor too casual. The scholars nod, grateful for your gentle coaching rather than any sharp correction. You lead them forward at a pace that matches the heartbeat of the palace. With unhurried grace, you adjust the drape of a petitioner's sash, ensuring the embroidered cranes face upward so luck does not spill out. Something reminds you that you tuck a stray thread back into place, humming a tune from the tea pavilion to keep your movements soft. The petitioner whispers thanks, his anxiety dissolving like sugar in warm tea. You offer a reassuring pat to the air beside his shoulder. Quietly, you confirm that the jade gong used for announcing arrivals rests exactly beside the dais, polished to a gentle gleam. The moment reminds you of gleam. You notice a smudge on the attendant's belt buckle and brush it away with your sleeve before anyone else can see it. The attendant nods without words, appreciation shining in his eyes. The gong remains silent, a promise rather than a demand. Softly, you brief the court musicians on the pacing of their accompaniment, indicating where the melody should drift like incense rather than stand upright. Something reminds you that you whisper a reminder to the zither player about the Emperor's fondness for the third string, a detail gleaned from last month's audience notes. The musicians nod, tuning their instruments with subdued grace. The rehearsal note dissolves into the hush. Patiently, you escort the scholars into the Hall of Supreme Harmony's inner chamber, keeping your steps measured so the floorboards do not protest. You can't help thinking of steps. You count them in silent groups of 8, an old habit from training days when rhythm meant steadiness. The chamber's air smells of sandalwood and fresh ink, a combination that invites deep listening. You breathe it in, feeling it settle like a shawl around your shoulders. Calmly, you position yourself near the Emperor's side table, prepared to hand over the next memorial or to supply a fresh brush without fuss. Something reminds you that you check the brush tips again, confirming they retain their sharp taper like calm arrows. The Emperor's gaze flickers briefly your way, an acknowledgement that feels like a beam of sun through clouds. You hold steady, the embodiment of quiet readiness. With practiced ease, you signal the first scholar to begin, raising your sleeve just slightly, the agreed-upon cue that looks like a casual stretch. It nudges you toward cues. You enjoy how the entire choreography relies on subtle gestures, a conversation between hands and eyes rather than raised voices. The scholar speaks with a respectful murmur, his words falling like gentle rain onto polished stone. You listen, attentive yet serene. Steadily, you note any names requiring future references, jotting them discreetly on a palm-sized slip that will later guide the archives. It occurs to you that you underline the governor of Fujian's request for harbor repairs, reminding yourself to locate the older coastal maps. The slip feels warm against your palm, a sign that it carries the day's pulse. You tuck it safely into your sleeve pocket. In that hush, you close the session by signaling the musicians to let the final chord linger just long enough to escort the scholars out with dignity. And, somehow dignity, you remind the youngest attendant to keep his eyes softly lowered, sparing him any awkwardness. The audience concludes without a ripple, as smooth as silk drawn over a tabletop. You release a quiet breath, satisfied with the balance. Gently, you escort the scholars toward the exit corridor, pointing out where the floor tilts slightly so they can adjust their steps. It crosses your mind that you share a gentle anecdote about a previous envoy who distracted himself by counting roof tiles, drawing a chuckle that lightens the moment. The scholars relax noticeably, grateful for the soft humor. You watch them depart with measured grace. With a slow breath, you confer with the Imperial Herald about tomorrow's scheduling, confirming which ministries will approach with requests and which will simply send notes. And somehow notes. You suggest a revised order that groups similar petitions to keep the Emperor's focus comfortable. The Herald records your idea with a feathered pen, nodding appreciatively. You both agree calm organization is the best offering. Under the palace roof, you meet briefly with the court ushers, handing them scented sachets to tuck into their sleeves so their every motion leaves a gentle trail of sandalwood. And, by the way, you remind them to hydrate between audiences, a mundane yet essential kindness that earns grateful smiles. The sachets sway like tiny pendulums as they bow. You feel a shared commitment to invisible comforts. Within the lantern glow, you review the ceremonial props, ensuring the lacquer trays, jade water goblets, and satin cushions sit ready for unexpected requests. And somehow cushions, you press one to feel its softness, remembering to rotate them so no single cushion bears too many afternoons. The storage cabinet smells of cedar and faint incense. You reorganize the shelves with labels angled for quick reading. At your own pace, you end the preparation by stepping outside the hall to stretch your back, letting the palace wind comb through your hair. It occurs to you that you whisper a brief report to the evening steward passing by, ensuring continuity as the day leans toward dusk. The steward pats your arm, a rare gesture acknowledging smooth cooperation. You return inside feeling refreshed and quietly proud. In the early calm, You stand for a final heartbeat beneath the carved ceiling, absorbing the layered echoes of voices, footsteps, and music that have settled there over centuries. And somehow echoes, you promise to keep tomorrow's cadence just as gentle, treating each sound as part of a lullaby. The vow rings softly in your chest. You step away with shoulders relaxed. With deliberate steps, you glance toward the Emperor's empty seat, offering a respectful bow even in his absence to honor the stillness that follows a well-guided audience. You can't help thinking of honor. You silently thank the room for holding every whisper without judgment, cradling statecraft like a sleeping child. The gratitude hums through your bones. You turn toward the corridor, carrying that hum with you. Amid the quiet, you retreat to the reading chamber as sunset paints the ceiling beams with diluted apricot hues, a color that feels like the day exhaling. The lattice windows soften the light, scattering it across the stack of scrolls awaiting your gentle arrangement. It occurs to you that the shadow of a pine branch flickers against the wall, keeping you company like an old friend tracing shapes in the air. You take your seat on the lacquered stool designed for unhurried posture. With quiet care, you unroll the first scroll, a collection of maritime notes that mention Zheng voyages, the ink still crisp despite years of careful handling. You can't help thinking of voyages. You imagine the salt breeze reaching even this chamber, a soft echo carried in the parchment's faint creak. You smooth the edges with your palms, letting the paper warm to your touch. The characters glow softly in the fading light. In easy rhythm, you read aloud in a murmur, your voice meant more for the scroll than for any listener, savoring the cadence of official prose. It occurs to you that you insert a pause after each paragraph, aligning your breath with the rhythm of the narrative so the words feel like lullabies. The room responds with an approving silence. You continue, steady as a tide. With restful focus, you select a fresh sheet of bamboo paper to draft the Emperor's nightly summary, trimming the edges with a bone knife so the corners rest square. You can't help thinking of corners. You lightly sand them with pumice to prevent any snag on the writing silk, a small precaution you cherish. The paper accepts your brushstrokes with a soft sigh. Is less than #0. 2# is greater than. You admire how the ink spreads just enough to look alive. In the gentle light, you interweave a gentle anecdote about the gardener's success, coaxing peonies to bloom out of season, knowing the Emperor enjoys such tidings. It occurs to you that you reference the horticultural notes stored 2 shelves down, citing them for accuracy while keeping the tone tender. The anecdote rests in the summary like a small lantern. You can almost see it glowing on the page. With unhurried grace, you refill the inkstone with a blend suited for extended writing, adding a drop of clove oil to keep the room fragrant without overpowering the scrolls. It nudges you toward fragrance. The clove whispers of far harbors, and you smile at the thought of sailors leaning on railings to watch the moon. The aroma drifts through the chamber, calming and curious at once. You return to your brush with renewed patience. Quietly, you note an Imperial inquiry about grain barge repairs, and you cross-reference stored reports to provide a calm assurance that the docks remain stable. It feels natural to mention that you cite the Directorate of Works memorandum, content that the data aligns with the afternoon audience notes. You can't help thinking of alignment. You weave in a gentle reminder that the figures echo the memorial you copied in the Hall of Records at dawn, letting the day's circle close without fuss. The consistency feels like a hand resting lightly on your shoulder. You let the steadiness guide your pen. Softly, you fold the completed summary into a silk sleeve, sliding a cedar slip inside to keep moths at bay. You can't help thinking of cedar. The scent mingles with the clove until the chamber smells like a wandering marketplace softened by twilight. You tie the sleeve with a narrow ribbon whose color reflects the evening sky. The knot settles without protest. Patiently, you glance at the remaining scrolls, choosing a poem about cranes returning to roost, and you recite it softly to yourself. It feels natural to mention that the poem mentions a distant bell, and you pause to listen. Sure enough, a bell from the city wall tolls faintly, obliging the verse. The synchronicity feels like a secret handshake between text and world. You smile, letting the moment rest in your heart. Calmly, you finish by placing the scrolls back into their cabinet, aligning the title tabs so they peek out like calm sentinels. You can't help thinking of sentinels. You thank the stone lion outside the window in a whisper, asking it to watch over the night readers. The lion, in its stillness, seems to incline ever so slightly. You gather the silk sleeve and head toward the Imperial study with unhurried steps. With practiced ease, you pause to oil the hinges of the scroll cabinet, using a cotton swab dipped in sesame oil to prevent any squeak from interrupting future evenings. It feels natural to mention that you hum a slow tune while working, imagining the hinges enjoying the improvised lullaby. The motion is small yet satisfying, like smoothing a wrinkle from silk. The cabinet responds with silent gratitude. Steadily, you copy a favorite line from the maritime notes onto a small slip, planning to share it with a younger attendant who dreams of distant shores. It brings to mind the distant dreams, and you add a gentle reminder that even the grandest voyages begin with deliberate steps on familiar floors. The slip curls slightly as the ink dries. You weigh it down with a shell you keep for such moments. In that hush, you adjust the reading lamps, trimming wicks so the flames remain steady without casting harsh shadows across the parchment. It feels natural to mention that you tilt one lamp toward the corner where the Emperor sometimes rests his wrist, ensuring the light kisses rather than glares. The lamp glass catches the sunset glow, doubling its warmth. You admire the play of gold on gold before returning to work. Gently, you review the poetry chest, sorting bamboo slips by theme: mountains, rivers, autumn grasses, so tomorrow's selection flows naturally. You can't help thinking of themes. You notice the gentle rains section running low and make a note to request fresh copies from the scriptorium. The chest smells of lacquer and distant forests. You glide your fingers over the labels, grateful for such orderly abundance. With a slow breath, you finish by standing at the window for a final glance at the darkening courtyard, watching lanterns bloom like patient flowers. It feels natural to mention that you promised to recount the scene to your roommates later, gifting them the image before sleep. The evening breeze lifts a few strands of your hair, cool and attentive. You bow to the fading sun before moving on. Under the palace roof, you cradle the silk sleeve against your chest for a breath, feeling its gentle weight remind you of the knowledge it carries. You can't help thinking of knowledge. You vow to treat each dispatch as a quiet story deserving careful voice when you deliver it. The vow settles warm and light in equal measure. You slip into the hallway like ink flowing onto fresh parchment. Within the lantern glow, you pass the scriptorium doorway and nod to the lone copyist still awake, promising with a whisper to bring warming tea if the work stretches past moonset. Meanwhile, promises, you know he will insist he needs nothing, yet will smile at the offer all the same. The hallway absorbs your hushed exchange like silk soaking up dye. You continue onward, footsteps feathered by intention. At your own pace, you begin evening rounds by lighting the courtyard lamps in a clockwise path, letting the waxed wicks catch fire with tiny, obliging sighs. The sky deepens to indigo, and the first stars hesitate behind a veil of thin clouds. A thought drifts to you. Hum the lantern song your mentor taught you, a tune without words that turns each flame into an old friend. The courtyard glows like a calm constellation. In the early calm, you inspect the lamplighter hooks, ensuring the brass remains smooth so no sleeve catches on a stray burr. You can't help thinking of sleeves. You tuck your own tighter around your wrists, mindful of the gentle breezes that like to tease loose fabric. You move with the measured grace of someone painting the night rather than fighting it. The hooks gleam under the newborn light. With deliberate steps, you pause by the astronomical pavilion to confer with the star charts, noting the official sunrise time for tomorrow's schedule. It crosses your mind that the astronomer mentions a faint comet far to the north, and you promise to remind the Emperor with the quiet enthusiasm such news deserves. The mention of a comet feels like a gentle invitation to dream. You tuck the detail into your mental ledger of soft marvels. Amid the quiet, you check the courtyard locks, running your fingers along the carved wood to ensure the joints remain snug but not stubborn. It nudges you toward joints. You flex your fingers afterward, thanking them for years of practice closing gates without a squeak. The gates settle into place like sleepy giants finding comfortable pillows. You fasten the final latch with a satisfied breath. With quiet care, you visit the corridor leading to the consort's quarters, adjusting lampshades so the light filters gently through silk rather than glaring off polished floors. A thought drifts to you, whisper to the shades about the day's quiet triumphs, as if gossiping with old friends who never repeat a word. The light softens instantly, casting a glow that flatters both walls and weary eyes. You feel the corridor relax around you. In easy rhythm, you set out small dishes of salt at threshold corners, an old palace superstition that keeps wandering spirits satisfied with simple tastes. Meanwhile, superstition, you chuckle softly at the memory of a younger attendant who once tasted the salt out of curiosity, only to declare it delightfully ordinary. You refresh each dish with a pinch from your pouch, the grains sparkling like tiny promises. The threshold feels safer for the ritual. With restful focus, you stop by the koi pond to check the floating lanterns, making sure their wax cups sit level so the flames burn evenly. You remember one lantern lists slightly, and you nudge it back with a bamboo pole, murmuring apologies to the fish for disturbing their mirrored sky. The koi glide beneath with unbothered grace, scales glinting like coins. You promise to bring them a treat tomorrow. In the gentle light, you make a note to replace a torn lamp tassel, slipping a reminder into your sleeve pocket for the morning runner. You can't help thinking of reminders. You also jot a line about polishing the bronze mirrors that catch lamplight in the eastern hall. Each note feels light, like a petal pressed between pages. You savor the neatness of your handwriting even in the dim glow. With unhurried grace, you listen for any uneven footsteps during rounds, an old habit that helps you catch loose stones before they trip someone. A thought drifts to tonight. The only sound is the soft pad of your own slippers and a distant yawn from a sentry-changing post. You take this quiet as a sign that the palace rests content. The quiet wraps around you like a shawl. Quietly, you finish by standing in the center of the courtyard, turning slowly to admire the lamps you tended, each flame anchored yet free. That thought leads to admiration. You thank the night for arriving with such gentleness and remind yourself that light requires darkness to appear so kindly. The stars finally peep through, scattering themselves with polite restraint. You bow to them before heading toward the night watch station. Softly, you loop back to check the oil levels one more time, lifting each lid carefully to avoid disturbing the calm flames. Something reminds you that you praise a lantern that has burned steadily all week, treating it like a loyal companion. The oil glistens in recognition before you lower the lid. You move on with satisfied precision. Patiently, you inspect the windscreens positioned along the walkway, adjusting their bamboo slats so breezes flow without bullying the lamps. That thought leads to breezes. You catch a faint hint of river air drifting from the moat, and you breathe it deeply for good luck. The screens creak softly as they settle into new angles. You pat their frames like one might soothe a dependable mule. Calmly, you note which lamp cords require rebraiding, tying a silk ribbon around their posts as a reminder for the morning repair crew. Something reminds you that you choose ribbons dyed the color of twilight, so they blend with the evening palette while still catching your eye. The ribbons flutter gently, promising cooperation. You smile at their discreet effectiveness. With practiced ease, you share a brief moment with the gate sentry, handing him a warm rice cake saved from the kitchens. Meanwhile, sharing, he tells you about the new calligraphy pattern his daughter practiced in today's letter, and you promise to look at the strokes later. The rice cake's steam mingles with the lamplight for a heartbeat. You both chuckle quietly to keep the night serene. Steadily, you close the circuit by writing a short report on the evening's lamp condition, noting weather, flame height, and minor repairs scheduled. A thought drifts to you, add a gentle note praising the lamp crew's diligence, aware that encouragement burns as steadily as oil. The report feels complete without sounding mechanical. You tuck it into the ledger with a final nod to the glowing courtyard. In that hush, you pause at the courtyard gate before rejoining the night watch, letting your hand rest on the cool iron latch for a comforting heartbeat. And somehow comfort, you whisper for the lamps to keep guarding sleeping rooms with patient light until dawn arrives. The metal seems to hum in agreement. You open the gate silently and slip through like a shadow with warm intentions. Gently, you take one last look over your shoulder, noting how the lantern light sketches gentle halos around roof tiles slick with evening dew. You can't help thinking of halos. You imagine each glow as a promise that stories will remain soft tonight, undisturbed by harsh edges. The image settles behind your eyelids like a painted screen. You walk onward, cradling it for the night watch to admire. With a slow breath, you come to the night watch pavilion just as the water clock's midnight bell releases a soft, rounded note. The moonlight pours across the flagstones, turning them silver and making even your shadow appear contemplative. It feels natural to mention that the watch captain greets you with a cup of warm rice porridge, steam curling like a quiet invitation. You accept with both hands, appreciating the warmth that seeps into your palms. Under the palace roof, you sit with the captain and two junior attendants, sharing sips of the porridge while trading gentle observations about the day. That thought leads to observations. One junior notes that the evening breeze carried a hint of plum earlier, and you confirm with a smile because you noticed it too. The conversation flows like a brook barely lifting above a whisper. The porridge comforts your stomach without weighing it down. Within the lantern glow, you review the patrol schedule, ensuring each route overlaps enough to keep the palace stitched together with human presence. You find yourself noting you adjust one patrol so an elder guard can rest his knee, replacing him with a spry messenger eager for extra steps. The captain nods, grateful for your attentiveness to hidden aches. The parchment rustles as gently as sleep. At your own pace, you lead the first round along the inner walls, lantern in hand, watching the shadows to make sure they belong to known corners. That thought leads to shadows. You see your own stretching tall and feel amused that it appears more commanding than you ever claimed to be. The walls radiate the day's warmth, a comforting reminder that stone remembers kindness. Your footsteps fall into the same rhythm as the distant drums marking the hour. In the early calm, you pause by the Imperial library to check the seals on its doors, touching each one lightly to ensure the wax remains unbroken. A thought drifts to you murmur, a short blessing for the sleeping books, promising to keep their words safe until morning readers arrive. The seals gleam in the moonlight, steadfast and calm. You move on with a smile tucked into your sleeve. With deliberate steps, you visit the stargazers stationed on the roof, offering them a small pouch of roasted chestnuts to keep their fingers nimble. That thought leads to stars. They quietly point out constellations slipping westward, and you follow their gestures with appreciative awe. The sky looks like ink splashed with delicate silver droplets. You pocket the image for future retellings in the dormitory. Amid the quiet, you record the hour in the night ledger, noting the state of lanterns, locks, and the pleasant absence of urgent matters. You remember you draw a tiny moon beside the entry, a playful habit tolerated by the record keepers because it softens the rows of script. The ledger smells faintly of cedar and smoke, comforting as a familiar blanket. You close it with a gentle pat. With quiet care, you share a pocket full of ginger candies with the junior guards, encouraging them to savor each piece slowly so the warmth lasts. That thought leads to warmth. One guard thanks you and admits the candies remind him of his mother's kitchen, a memory that settles over the group like a down quilt. The gratitude glows brighter than any torch. You savor your own candy, letting it dissolve quietly. In easy rhythm, you conduct one final sweep along the palace ponds, listening for the faintest ripple that might signal mischief. You find yourself noting tonight the water lies still, cradling the moon's reflection as if protecting a fragile secret. You whisper appreciation to the pond for its cooperation. The water answers with a gentle, contented shimmer. With restful focus, you return to the pavilion and release the patrol for their rotation, inviting them to rest their feet on the warmed bricks for a moment before resuming. That thought leads to rest. You stretch your own legs, feeling the tug of muscles gently unwinding. The captain thanks you again for balancing the schedule with such care. You sip the last of the porridge, now merely warm, and feel ready for the final watch. In the gentle light, you check the sand timers lined along the wall, flipping each one to ensure the grains fall with leisurely steadiness. And by the way, you love how their hush resembles distant rain tapping on bamboo, and you let the sound guide your breathing. The timers obey, glimmering softly in the lantern light. You align them by height for the pleasure of order. With unhurried grace, you walk the perimeter of the inner court, noting which shadowed corners might benefit from an extra lamp tomorrow. That thought leads to shadows. You imagine how they will shrink once you make the adjustment, and the thought feels like smoothing a wrinkled sheet. The flagstones echo your footsteps with low, contented taps. You jot mental notes in the rhythm of those taps. Quietly, you share a quiet chant with the gate monks who keep vigil nearby, their voices weaving with yours in a pattern older than the palace walls. Something reminds you that they thank you for the earlier ginger candies, and you promise to bring more when the next shipment arrives. The chant vibrates in the night air, gentle and grounding. You part with a bow, feeling lighter than when you arrived. Softly, you pause to adjust the night watch banner, tightening its cords so it hangs without drooping, a symbol of readiness even during rest hours. It nudges you towards symbols. You brush the embroidered characters with reverence, remembering the history they carry through countless shifts. The fabric rustles softly, appreciative of the care. You secure the knots with deft fingers practiced over years. Patiently, you conclude with a final look at the water clock, noting the measured drip that divides the night into tender segments. And by the way, you whisper thanks to the artisans who built it, because their craftsmanship keeps the palace heartbeat steady. The surface glimmers under moonlight as if smiling. You return to your post, ready for whatever quiet the next hours hold. Calmly, you take a seated moment on the pavilion bench, rotating your ankles slowly to prevent stiffness from setting in. It nudges you toward prevention. You remind the nearby guard to stretch as well, turning the pause into a shared ritual. The bench creaks approvingly beneath your combined gratitude. You rise feeling limber enough to greet the remaining hours with ease. With practiced ease, you tilt your head to listen for distant city sounds, catching only the faint lull of traders settling their shutters beyond the palace walls. It brings to mind the traders beyond the walls, and you imagine them carrying lanterns home like portable moons, and the thought keeps you connected to the wider world without stirring longing. The night breeze carries a hint of roasted chestnut from somewhere unseen. You inhale, letting the scent mingle with the palace calm. Steadily, you return to the dormitory as the night tips toward dawn, the corridor lamps now softened to embers that glow like sleepy eyes. The floor carries the day's warmth into the quiet hours, and you let your souls soak it in. And by the way, the faint scent of pine needles from the sachets you filled earlier greets you at the threshold, loyal as a small dog. You smile, knowing the garden breeze followed you home. In that hush, you tidy your sleeping space, smoothing the quilt so it welcomes the weight of your body without protest. It brings to mind the quilt, and the one you use still bears the careful stitches of a longtime friend who now oversees the laundry halls, and you whisper thanks toward her wing of the palace. The stitches catch the low light, forming tiny constellations of their own. You press your palm against them, feeling the texture tell you to rest. Gently, you light a single stick of calming incense, letting its aroma mingle with the sachets until the air feels layered but not crowded. And by the way, you choose the blend named Gentle River, recalling how its maker described the fragrance as water finding its way between stones. The smoke curls lazily, carrying away any leftover tension. You exhale, ready to follow it wherever it wanders. With a slow breath, you kneel before your small altar, where a carved wooden tablet honors mentors and friends whose guidance still anchors you. Meanwhile, anchors, you place a sprig of chrysanthemum beside the tablet, a lingering gift from the morning tea pavilion. You offer a simple prayer for continued steadiness, nothing elaborate, just gratitude folded into breath. The candle flame flickers in approval. Under the palace roof, you jot the day's closing notes in your personal ledger, recording small victories such as the corridor lantern that needed coaxing or the koi lantern you straightened. It feels natural to mention that you also add a line about the astronomer's comet, marking it with a star doodle to revisit later. The entries read like a gentle conversation with yourself. You close the ledger softly so the thoughts can simmer overnight. Within the lantern glow, you change into your night robe, the fabric light as a sigh, and hang your day garments on a cedar peg to air. It nudges you towards cedar. The scent mingles with your own skin, reminding you that service and comfort can share the same sleeve. You fold the belt with deliberate slowness, letting the motion ease the last remnants of vigilance. The robe settles around you like a cloud. At your own pace, you share a quiet moment with your roommates, exchanging looks that say more than words about the day's gentle successes. It occurs to you that one of them offers a dried persimmon slice, and you accept, savoring the sugar that tastes faintly of late autumn sunlight. The sweetness lingers in your cheeks. You raise your cup of warm water in a silent toast to shared calm. In the early calm, you stretch out on the warmed kang, arranging your arms and legs so every part of you feels supported without stiffness. It nudges you towards support. You tuck a small cushion behind your knees, a trick taught by a senior attendant to keep dreams smooth. The cushion cradles your joints with quiet pride. You let your eyelids drift toward closure. With deliberate steps, you listen to the dormitory's soft chorus, a sigh, the rustle of fabric, the muted tick of the water clock, guiding everyone toward rest. You remember you match your breathing to that tick, letting inhale and exhale trade places like friends sharing a seat. The rhythm rocks you gently, as if the palace itself holds you in a careful embrace. You loosen your grip on wakefulness. Amid the quiet, you reach for the small pouch of polished worry stones kept under your pillow, turning them one by one to smooth any leftover thoughts. It nudges you towards stones. Each carries a tiny carved character: patience, kindness, steadiness, and you mouth the words as though tasting them. The stones cool your fingers while warming your mind. You slip the pouch back with a whispered thank you. With quiet care, you recall a gentle joke shared by a fellow steward about the emperor's cat chasing stray threads, and the memory blossoms into a soft chuckle. You remember, you promise yourself to bring a spare ribbon tomorrow in case the cat decides to supervise wardrobe duty again. The chuckle fades into a sleepy hum. You let it settle around you like an extra blanket. In easy rhythm, you imagine the palace rooflines bathed in moonlight, each tile absorbing the cool glow until morning warms it back to amber. You can't help thinking of roofs. You picture the stargazers reclining after their watch, eyes full of constellations and pockets full of quiet anecdotes. The imagery feels like a lullaby sketched across the ceiling. You follow the mental drawing until it dissolves into softness. With restful focus, you take a final sip of warm water, letting it slide down like a gentle stream smoothing stones in its path. And by the way, you savor the subtle mineral taste, a reminder that even simple elements carry stories from far-off springs. The warmth settles in your stomach, inviting relaxation. You place the cup aside with the care reserved for delicate porcelain. In the gentle light, you silently bless the day ahead, envisioning tasks lining up like friendly lanterns waiting to be lit without rush. It nudges you toward blessings. You include the gardeners, the cooks, the scribes, and every unseen hand that kept today serene. The gratitude glows within you, steady and mild. You let it dim gradually, preparing for sleep's embrace. With unhurried grace, you trace the outline of tomorrow's schedule in your imagination, arranging it like a string of pearls that will rest lightly around the palace. It nudges you toward pearls. You think fondly of the robes you tended, promising to safeguard them with the same care once dawn returns. The mental rehearsal slips into a drowsy hum. You let the hum fade as your breath slows. Quietly, you let your mind wander through the day, revisiting incense smoke, silk shadows, tea steam, and lantern light until they blur into a comforting haze. It nudges you toward haze. The final image before sleep is the curling incense at dawn, looping back to greet you for tomorrow. You smile in the dark, ready to step into another cycle of quiet devotion. You drift toward dreams with the palace heartbeat beneath your own.